The history of Qatar spans from its first duration of human occupation to its formation as a modern state. Human occupation of Qatar dates back to 50,000 years ago, and Stone Age encampments and tools have been unearthed in the peninsula. Mesopotamia was the first civilization to have a presence in the area during the Neolithic period, evidenced by the discovery of potsherds originating from the Ubaid period near coastal encampments. The peninsula fell under the domain of several different empires during its early years of settlement, including the Seleucid, the Parthians and the Sasanians. In 628 AD, the population was introduced to Islam after Muhammad sent an envoy to Munzir ibn Salah. It became a pearl trading center by the 8th century. The Abbasid era saw the rise of several settlements. After the Bani Utbah and other Arab tribes conquered Bahrain in 1783, the Al-Khalifa imposed their authority over Bahrain and mainland Qatar. Over the preceding centuries, Qatar was a site of contention between the Wahhabi of Najd and the Al-Khalifa. The Ottomans expanded their empire into eastern Arabia in 1871, withdrawing from the area in 1915 after the beginning of World War I. In 1916, Qatar became a British protectorate and Abdullah al-Thani signed a treaty stipulating that he could only cede territory to the British in return for protection from all aggression by sea and support in case of a land attack. A 1934 treaty granted more extensive protection. In 1935, a 75-year oil concession was granted to the Qatar Petroleum Company and high-quality oil was discovered in 1940 in Dukhan. During the 1950s and 1960s, increasing oil revenues brought prosperity, rapid immigration, substantial social progress, and the beginnings of the country's modern history. After Britain announced a policy of ending the treaty relationships with the Persian Gulf sheikdoms in 1968, Qatar joined the other 8 states then under British protection in a plan to form a federation of Arab Emirates. By mid-1971, as the termination date of the British treaty relationship approached, the 9 still had not agreed on terms of union. Accordingly, Qatar declared its independence on September 3, 1971. In June 1995, Deputy Emir Hamad bin Khalifa deposed his father Khalifa bin Hamad in a bloodless coup. The emir permitted more liberal press and municipal elections as a precursor to parliamentary elections. A new constitution was approved via public referendum in April 2003 and came into effect in June 2005. Prehistory Paleolithic Age. Archaeological evidence has dated human occupation in the Qatar Peninsula to 50,000 years in the past, when small groups of Stone Age inhabitants built seasonal encampments and sites for working flint. At this time, the Persian Gulf was a dry land river valley. The modern-day territory of Qatar was not peninsular and did not contain any relief, but was instead a part of the contiguous landmass stretching from Arabia to the Persian Gulf. As a result, it was probably only used as a winter grazing zone for hunter-gatherers who favored the more fertile land of the Persian Gulf Valley. In 1961, a Danish archaeological expedition carried out on the peninsula uncovered approximately 30,000 stone implements from 122 Paleolithic sites. Most of the sites were situated along the coastline, and were divided into 4 separate cultural groups based on flint typology. Macrolithic tools such as scrapers, arrowheads and hand axes dating to the Lower and Middle Paleolithic periods were among the discoveries. The flooding of the Persian Gulf, which occurred 8,000 years ago, resulted in the displacement of Persian Gulf inhabitants, and the occupation of Qatar to capitalize on its coastal resources. For this time onward, Qatar Qatar was regularly used as rangeland for nomadic tribes from the Najd and Al-Hassa regions in Saudi Arabia, and a number of seasonal encampments were constructed around sources of water. Neolithic period. The earliest settlements on the peninsula are dated to the Neolithic period. A site on the northwest coast called Wadi Dabayun is one of the oldest known settlements in Qatar. Marine life remains, plant material and structural components were among the artifacts excavated. Carbon dating of organic remains revealed human habitation dating back to 7,500 years in the past. Fragments of pottery originating from the early Ubaid period were also recovered. One of the earliest settlements found in the southern portion of Qatar is known as Shagra and dates back to 6000 BC. A two-room structure, flints and remnants of fish and mollusks were found at the site. Pottery originating from the later Ubaid period were uncovered in the peninsula in 3 separate expeditions during the 1970s and 1980s. Microprobe analyses carried out on the potsherds deduced that they originated from the southern region of Mesopotamia, owing to the fact that the Qatari peninsula would not have accommodated the necessary conditions for a pottery-making civilization to flourish. It has been hypothesized that the pottery was produced in and traded down the Persian Gulf settlements. As there is a distinct absence of pottery in overland routes, it is believed that trading was primarily facilitated by sea routes. Al-Daasa, a settlement located on the northeast coast of Qatar, is the most extensive Ubaid site in the country. It was excavated by a Danish team in 1961. The site is theorized to have accommodated a small seasonal encampment, possibly a lodging for a hunting-fishing-gathering group who made recurrent visits. This is evidenced by the discovery of nearly 60 fire pits at the site, which may have been used to cure and dry fish, in addition to flint tools such as scrapers, cutters' blades and arrowheads. Furthermore, many painted Ubaid potsherds and a carnelian bead were found in the fire pits, suggesting overseas connections. In an excavation done in Al-Khor in 1977-78, several Ubaid period graves were uncovered in what is considered the earliest recorded burial site in the country. One grave contained the cremated remains of a young woman with no grave goods. 8 other graves contained grave goods, including beads made of shell, carnelian and obsidian. The obsidian most likely originated from Najran in southwest Arabia. Bronze Age. The Qatari peninsula was close enough to the Dilmun civilization in Bahrain to have felt its influence. Barbar pottery was excavated in 2 sites by the Qatar Archaeology Project, evidencing the country's involvement in Dilmun's trade network. When the people of Dilmun began engaging in maritime activities around 2100 to 1700 BC, the inhabitants of Qatar started diving for pearls in the Persian Gulf. The Qataris were engaged in the trading of pearls and date palms during this era. It has been argued that the remains of Dilmun settlements found in Qatar do not represent major evidence of long-term human habitation. Qatar remained largely uninhabited during this period due to regular migration by nomadic Arab tribes searching for untapped sources, food and water. The settlements, dating to the Dilmun period, particularly in Al-Khor Island, may have been established to expedite trade journeys between Bahrain to the closest significant settlement in the Persian Gulf, Tel Abrak. Another scenario entails that the encampments were created by visiting fishermen or pearl fishers from Dilmun. It has also been suggested that the presence of pottery is indicative of trade between the inhabitants of Qatar and the Dilmun civilization, though this is considered unlikely due to the scarce population of the peninsula during this period. Kassite Babylonian-influenced materials dating back to the 2nd millennium BC, which were found in Alcor Island, reveal evidence of trade relations between the inhabitants of Qatar and the Kassite. Among the findings were 3 million crushed snail shells and Kassite potsherds. It has been asserted that Qatar was the site of the earliest known production of shellfish dye, owing to a purple dye industry operated by the Kassite which existed on the island. The dye was obtained from the murex snail and was known as Tyrian purple. Dye production may have been supervised by the Kassite administration in Bahrain with the purpose of exporting the dye to Mesopotamia. Antiquity, Iron Age and Babylonian Persian control. Assyrian king Esarhaddon led a successful campaign against Baizu, an area which encompassed Ilmen and Qatar, in c. 680 BC. To date, no archaeological evidence of early Iron Age settlements have been discovered in the peninsula. This is likely due to adverse climatic changes rendering Qatar less inhabitable during this period. In the 5th century BC, Greek historian Herodotus published the earliest known description of the population of Qatar, describing its inhabitants as seafaring Canaanites. Hellenistic period around 325 BC, Alexander the Great sent his top admiral, Androsthenes of Thassos, to survey the entire Persian Gulf. The requested charts arrived shortly after Alexander died in 323. Seleucus I Nicator was awarded the eastern part of the ancient Greek Empire after Alexander's death. Starting from 312, he expanded the Seleucid Empire eastward of Babylon, purportedly encompassing parts of eastern Arabia. Archaeological evidence of Greek-influenced materials has been discovered in Qatar. Excavations north of Dakhan uncovered potsherds of Seleucid characteristic, and a cairn field consisting of 100 burial mounds dating to the era was discovered in Ras of Brook. The relatively large number of cairns suggest a sizable seafaring community prevailed in the area. After losing most of the territories in the Persian Gulf, Seleucid influence ceased in the area by c. 250 BC, Persian control following the eviction of the Seleucid by the Parthian Empire in c. 250 BC, the latter gained dominion over the Persian Gulf and Arabian coast. As the Parthians were dependent on trade routes through the Persian Gulf, they established garrisons along the coast. Pottery recovered from expeditions in Qatar has demonstrated links to the Parthian Empire. Ras of Brook, a coastal city north of Dakhan, housed a fishing station which foreign vessels used to dry fish in 140 BC. A number of stone structures and large quantities of fish bones were recovered from the site. Pliny the Elder, a Roman author, wrote an account on the inhabitants of the peninsula around the mid-1st century AD. He referred to them as the Cathare, and described them as nomads who constantly roamed in search of water and food. Around the 2nd century, Ptolemy produced the first known map to depict the land mass, referring to it as Ketura. In 224 AD, the Sasanian Empire gained control over the territories surrounding the Persian Gulf. Qatar played a role in the commercial activity of the Sasanids, contributing to at least 2 commodities, precious pearls and purple dye. Sassanid pottery and glassware were found in Mesrua, a city northwest of Doha, and fragments of glassware and pottery were discovered in a settlement in al-Maya. Under the Sassanid reign, many of the inhabitants in eastern Arabia were introduced to Christianity after the religion was dispersed eastward by Mesopotamian Christians. Monasteries were constructed in Qatar during this era, and further settlements were founded. During the latter part of the Christian era, Qatar was known by the Syriac name Beth Katre. A variant of this was Beth Qattara. The region was not limited to Qatar. It also included Bahrain, Tarout Island, Al-Ghat, and Al-Hassa. The dioceses of Beth Qattara did not form an ecclesiastical province, except for a short period during the mid to late 7th century. They were instead subject to the Metropolitan of Fars. Muhammad sent al-Ala al-Hadrami, a Muslim envoy, to a ruler in eastern Arabia named Munzir ibn Salah al-Tamimi in 628 and requested that he and his people accept Islam. Munzir obliged his request and most Arab tribes in Qatar converted to Islam. It has been proposed by historian Habib Rahman that Munzir ibn Sa''s seat of administration existed in the Mawab or al-Maa area of Qatar. This theory is lent credence by an archaeological find of approximately 100 small stone-built Islamic period houses and fortified palaces of a tribal leader in Mawab, which are thought to have originated from the early Islamic period. After the adoption of Islam, the Arabs led the Muslim conquest of Persia, which resulted in the fall of the Sasanian Empire. It is likely that some settled populations in Qatar did not immediately convert to Islam. Isaac of Nineveh, a 7th century Syriac Christian bishop regarded as a saint in some churches, was born in Beth Qattara. Other notable Christian scholars dating to this period who hailed from Beth Qattara include Dardasho Qattara, Gabriel of Qatar and Ahob of Qatar. In 674, the bishops of Beth Qattara stopped attending synods. Muslim rule. Umayyad period. Qatar was described as a famous horse and camel breeding center during the Umayyad period. It began benefiting from its commercially strategic position in the Persian Gulf during the 8th century, going on to become a center of pearl trading. During the Second Fitna, a renowned Khariji commander named Qatari ibn al-Fujr, who was described as the most popular, admired and powerful Khariji leader, led the Azrika, a subsect of the Khawarij, into numerous battles. He held the title of Emir al-Mu'minin and ruled over the radical Azrika movement for more than 10 years. Born in Al-Kuwair in Qatar, he also minted the first known Kharjit coins, the earliest of which dated to 688 to 689. The Umayyad Caliphate brought about much political and religious change in Western Asia starting from the late 7th century. As a result, there were many revolts against the Umayyad at the end of the 7th century, particularly in Qatar and Bahrain. Ibn al-Fujr led an uprising against the Umayyad caliphs for more than 20 years. In 750, discontent in the caliphate had reached a critical level due to the treatment of non-Arab citizens in the empire. The Abbasid Revolution resulted in the overthrow of the Umayyad Caliphate, ushering in the Abbasid period. Abbasid period. Several settlements, including Mawab, were developed during the Abbasid period. Over 100 stone-built houses, 2 mosques, and an Abbasid fort were constructed in Mawab during this era. Mawab Fort is the oldest intact fort in the country and was built over the ruins of a previous fort which was destroyed by fire. The town was the site of the first sizable settlement established off the coastal area of Qatar. A similar site, containing Tiang stoneware and dating to the 9th and 10th centuries, was discovered in Al-Naymin. Substantial development in the pearling industry around the Qatari peninsula occurred during the Abbasid era. Ships from Basra en route to India and China would make stops in the port of Qatar during this period. Chinese porcelain, West African coins and pieces from Thailand have been discovered in Qatar. Archaeological remains from the 9th century suggest that Qatar's inhabitants used greater wealth, perhaps from pearl trade, to construct higher quality homes and public buildings. However, when the Caliphate's prosperity declined in Iraq, so too did it in Qatar. Most of eastern Arabia, particularly Bahrain and the Qatari Peninsula, were sites of revolt against the Abbasid Caliphate around 868. Muhammad ibn Ali, a revolutionary, roused the people of Bahrain and Qatar into a rebellion, but the rebellion was unsuccessful and he relocated to Basra. He was later successful in instigating the Zanj rebellion. A radical Ismaili group called the Qarmatians established a utopian republic in eastern Arabia in 899. They considered the pilgrimage to Mecca a superstition, and once in control of the Bahraini state they launched raids along the pilgrim routes crossing the Arabian Peninsula. In 906 they ambushed the pilgrim caravan returning from Mecca and massacred 20,000 pilgrims. Qatar is mentioned in 13th-century Muslim scholar Yaqut al-Hamawi's book, Mujam al-Burdan, which alludes to the Qataris' fine striped, woven cloaks and the skills in improvement and finishing of spears, known as Qatir spears. The spears acquired their name as an homage to the region of Al-Qat, which encompassed present-day Qatif, Uqair and Qatar. Post-Islamic Golden Age, Usfurids and Ormus control much of eastern Arabia was controlled by the Usfurids in 1253, but control of the region was later seized by the Prince of Ormus in 1320. Qatar's pearls provided the kingdom with one of its main sources of income. The Portuguese defeated the Ormus by 1507 following the destruction of the fleet by Afonso de Albuquerque's forces. However, Albuquerque's captains grew rebellious and he was compelled to abandon the Ormus island. Ultimately, in 1515, King Manuel I killed Sultan Saifuddin's vizier Raysamd, pressuring the Sultan to become a vassal of King Manuel. Portuguese and Ottoman control Bahrain and mainland Qatar had been seized by the Portuguese in 1521. After the Portuguese claimed control, they constructed a series of fortresses along the Arabian coast. However, there have been no significant Portuguese ruins found in Qatar. The Portuguese focused on creating a commercial empire in eastern Arabia and exported gold, silver, silks, cloves, amber, horses and pearls. The population of Al-Hassa submitted voluntarily to the rule of the Ottomans in 1550, preferring them to the Portuguese. After the Portuguese were expelled from the area in 1602 by the Dutch and British, the Ottomans saw little need to maintain a military presence in the Al-Hassa region. As a result, the Ottomans were expelled by the Bani Khalid in 1670. Origin of the Bani Utbah tribe. The Al-Bin Ali tribe are the original descendants of Bani Utbah tribe, being that they are the only tribe to carry and nurture the last name Al-Utbi in their ownerships documents of palm gardens in Bahrain as early as the year 1699 to 1111 Hijri. They are specifically descendants of the great-grandfather Ali Al-Utbi, who was a descendant of the great-grandfather Utbah, hence the name Bani Utbah, which means sons of Utbah. Utbah is the great-grandfather of the Bani Utbah, which is a section of Kafaf from Bani Sulaim bin Mansur from Madar from Adnan. The plural word for Al-Utbi is Utub and the name of the tribe is Bani Utbah. Rule of Bani Khalid. Having expelled the Ottomans, the Bani Khalid held jurisdiction over Qatar from 1670 onward. In 1766, the Utub clans of Al-Jalama and Al-Khalifa migrated from Kuwait to Zubarah in Qatar. By the time of their arrival in Zubarah, the Bani Khalid exercised weak power over Qatar, though the largest village was ruled by distant kin of the Bani Khalid. After the Persian occupation of Basra in 1777, many merchants and families moved from Basra and Kuwait to Zubarah. The town became a thriving center of trade and pearling in the Persian Gulf region. After this movement, the Al-Khalifa claimed Qatar and Bahrain by 1783, whereas Bani Khalid control of neighboring Al-Hasa officially came to an end in 1795.